Hey, Diana, did you know that a hedgehog could be the key to your law practice?
Mark, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard.
Ladies and gentlemen, jurists and just curious, welcome to the Successful Barrister Podcast. Here you'll learn about marketing, management, and life skills for lawyers that probably won't get you disbarred. Hosted by Marc Whitehead, a seasoned lawyer who remembers when fax machines were cutting edge, and Diana Berry, attorney, COO, and the brains behind the scenes. Together, they are the legal world's most dynamic duo since statutes met regulations. So if you're looking to build a practice, not a prison, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful Barrister, where legal legends are made.
Welcome to the Successful Barrister, the podcast that discusses marketing management and life skills for lawyers. I'm Marc Whitehead, along with my fabulous Chief Operating Officer, Diana Berry. Today, we are going to talk about good to great. Specifically, is good to great still relevant, or is it a relic?
Oh.
So, there's been some scuttlebutt, I think, on literary social media that I tend to pay attention to, specifically around business books, coaching strategies. And one of the historically relevant books that every business coach ever met to is Good to Great. Good to Great is a classic, but a lot has come out in the media lately about Good to Great. What Jim Collins did in his book is he basically did a study, and he limited his study to a relatively small number of companies in writing Good to Great. He cut it down to only about a dozen or so companies, roughly a dozen or so. And about a third of those companies have now bit the dust. I was like, oops.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think some of them that were like Circuit City, Fannie Mae bit the dust in 2008, or at least got bailed out by the government.
2009, yeah.
Yeah. I think also A&P and Ames were also on that list of companies that have had, I don't know, I think they're still around, but have had problems. Those are some of the criticisms about Good to Great. And Good to Great came out in 2001, which is like what now? That means it's almost
23, 24 years.
Yeah, pushing a quarter century out there. So looking at it, the criticisms, first of all, he only used about a dozen companies in his study.
Yeah.
That's kind of a statistically really, really small number of companies. You usually want your pool size, if you're going to do some sort of double blind, you need a statistically relevant sample size. I think I will admit one of the D's I made in college was in statistics.
Oh.
So I blame a woman for that.
We're going to edit that part out.
No, we're not. I'm still bitter.
I hope Tina doesn't hear that.
Yes, she knows about this. I've told her many times this story. But anyway, back to Good to Great. Only about a dozen companies. So statistically, we have a very small sample size. The other criticism of his study was he only used public companies. Well,
which I get, though.
Well, so the reason behind only using public companies is because there's publicly available data.
Well, and uniform ways of putting that data out there.
And I get it, and it was a valid point, but the flip to that, I don't know what the stats are, but I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% of all companies in America are not public companies. They're private companies like our law firm. And so you miss an entire population of potential study subjects out there when you limit yourself to that. However, I think the argument, the thesis that I'm going to have today, as we're going through this, is in spite of all these criticisms that have come out recently about Good to Great, I still think it's relevant. And I particularly think it's relevant to small businesses like our law firm, like our listeners' law firms, because in our world, I mean, we're small. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the backup system. We don't have the ability to absorb massive mistakes. We have to be very careful about what we do, because any massive mistake that we make could be fatal to the company. We just don't have enough capital behind us. We don't have enough bandwidth to survive.
To absorb those.
Yeah, you just can't absorb the tragic events that big corporations could ride out.
Well, and I'd say that even firms like ours that are in that growth mode, it could be also just death by a thousand cuts. Repeated things that you, as you're trying to climb up and get to that next level, and you just can't we'll talk about some of the things that we still think that are relevant, that Colin said, like discipline. And so over time, when you're investing money back in the business and you're still trying to grow, almost sometimes rather than just one big event, it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Or death by 1,000 employees.
Well, and hey, that's our next point. You're jumping the gun. But,
I am jumping the gun. I am jumping the gun.
But it is, I think, very cool that, it's hard. When you said we were going to talk about good to great, but my first thought was, well, of course we are. It's a classic. You have to talk about good to great when you're doing any kind of podcast like this. But at the same time, it's also intimidating because it's like, what are we going to talk about that's new? But I think hopefully our listeners will find that, and we've got some interesting thoughts on how it applies to law firms, even more so, like you said, in where we are now in this day and age.
It's just kind of weird. Even Collins himself said that he kind of wrote his books out of order because his first book became popular, was called Built to Last. And he himself said that Built to Last should have been the second book he wrote. Good to Great should have been the first. He actually encourages you to read in that order. Read Good to Great first, because that's probably what happened to Circuit City or happened to Fannie Mae. They didn't pay attention to Built to Last.
Yep, that's probably fair. Yeah, it's been a while since I've read that one. So
that'll be a future podcast because I don't have that one stored in my memory banks. But anyway, I think that the principles, I think there's about 5 principles in Good to Great that we'll talk about in section 2 that are really relevant. But of course, I've always said the most important one is confront the true facts. I think too many people, too many law firms in particular, do not have a good handle on the true facts, what is actually going on in their law firm, whether it's in terms of what their people are doing or how their managers are running things or what their finances actually are. I was reading a book the other day, a totally separate book, a total snoozer, but it happened to deal with finance. It's tough. You have to slog through the financial books because they're always talking about all of these concepts that are not terribly sexy, not terribly exciting, how people deceive themselves with their own numbers in their firm. Anyway, what is your biggest point? We'll get into this a little bit more in part 2, but what is your biggest overarching premise behind theme that you really like about Good to Great?
I like first who, then what. We have the what. All of our listeners, I'm assuming they're lawyers. We're law firms. We have the what, but the who, especially in where we are now, post-COVID, employees have all the options. They can work remote, they can work hybrid, they can work for another country, for a United States company. There's so many options, and we were talking about this earlier. I think our listeners probably fall into 2 main categories. One, they're like you. They have their law firm and they're trying to maybe get to that next level. They're not practicing. They're just trying to grow even more. And then I think the other group, people who perhaps want to get to where you are, who are still in the weeds of their trial calendar and still practicing and don't know what that next key hire is going to be or how they even get to that next step of getting their life back, their personal life back away from the law firm, not having their law firm be the prison. Well, kind of where we were talking about that. And you can't get to either of those places without the who. It's so important in the services industry.
You just made the point right there I was about to make. We are a service business, and service is not done by robots. It's not done by mass baking of cookies or anything like that. We don't sell widgets. When you sell services, it is purely a people business on both sides of the ledger.
Well, and, we are a disability law firm. Our clients tend to be high touch. But for all the personal injury attorneys out there, the other contingency type law firms, they're all high touch, meaning that our clients perhaps need that people interaction. You cannot use AI for that. You can try and help AI with some of the more routine things, but at the end of the day, we are a people business. First who, then what? That's my
right. And the other, the add-on to that is we're a people business where people come to us at probably the worst times of their life.
Exactly. Nobody
comes to us. Nobody comes to a PI lawyer or a disability lawyer because something good happened to them.
Yep.
They high touch on steroids.
Yep, and I'm sure if there's another listener, another attorney out there, let us know what you think. But that's not one of these. But we do think that our client base tends to be a little we have to have the right people, and if not, then our client base isn't can be satisfied.
This podcast is sponsored by Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability benefits law firm. Marc Whitehead runs a firm of over 60 dedicated people whose mission is to make a difference in the lives of our injured and disabled clients. Marc represents disabled claimants in Social Security disability, private disability insurance, and veterans disability claims in all 50 states. Marc Whitehead is double board certified in both Social Security disability law and personal injury trial law. Marc has litigated disability cases in over 40 states and counting and can help your clients too. Stop throwing your phone calls away. Call Marc Whitehead at 701-VIP-LEAD. That's 701-VIP-LEAD. Or visit our website at disabilitydenials.com. Referral fees are paid in all jurisdictions where it is permitted. Refer us your disability cases today and know that your clients will be in good hands.
And we're back. All right. So we're going to get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of good to great, even though I think I need a little therapy now because I brought up that D in statistics 30-something years ago, and it's starting to bug me. So help me just real quickly. How do I do
never got a D in statistics.
I'm sure you didn't.
I thought that was helping.
No, they didn't help at all.
Okay, well, then maybe we should just keep going.
Did you ever even make anything lower than a B in college?
No.
Oh, God, help me. Okay. Moving on. Let's talk about good to great.
So we talked a little bit about first who, then what. I guess we can talk a little bit about that. I love his idea about the Stockdale Paradox. The whole thing on discipline, I think it was chapter 6 or something. I really liked his thoughts there.
Start with the Stockdale Paradox. Now, I've heard this in Atticus. They probably mentioned the Stockdale Paradox at least 50 times over the last 15 years I've been there. It just, they constantly go back to it. But a lot of people don't know what that is. Can you explain to our audience exactly what the Stockdale Paradox is?
Yep. So Collins does a great job telling a very just captivating story about where this came about, but the Stockdale Paradox itself, but I think I might be quoting, so it's not my words. You have to retain faith that you will prevail in the end, and you must also confront the most brutal facts of your current reality.
And that came from General Stockdale. I'm blanking on his first name, but he was basically a prisoner during the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. And he was in there many, many years. I forget it. I want to say at least 5. And the point he was making is the people that actually survived the POW camp were those ones that confronted the brutal facts, yet maintained faith that they would prevail in the end.
Yeah, that they would one day make it out of the camp. And as interesting as the Stockdale Paradox is, the concept, what he said that I found also just as interesting was that the people that did not make it out of the camp were the optimists. The people that basically said that they were going to get out and they were going to get out by Easter. Because when Easter comes and goes, and you're not out, you're still there, that's almost more destructive.
Soul crushing.
So yeah, that's the word, soul crushing. And it's hard to bounce back from that, especially, I would say, imagine in a POW camp. And so
how do we apply that to a law firm?
Well, so I think candidly, we're going to have my own therapy session now. I think about the Stockdale Paradox where we are now with our firm. So as most of our listeners know, we're in this massive growth plan. I'd say we've got a great 5-year plan that we're in the middle of, year 1. And I think we're in that accepting the brutal facts of where we are. It requires long hours, especially I think from my position. So I can get a lot burnt out. And so it's hard on me because then I take my leadership and my emotions into the firm. And so I have to be careful about that. And so the way that I apply the Stockdale Paradox is what we've talked a little bit about, I think, in one of our prior episodes, is the J curve that Christine talked about. You've got to know where you are in the J. And so for anyone listening and not watching me draw a J in the air right now, are you in that curve, that soft curve where you begin to draw a J and you're at the bottom? Or is it a lifestyle that you're just stuck there? And I think a lot about the decision that you made to get out of personal injury as your main practice. You recognize the way I think about it is your trial, your adherence to your trial calendar, right? We've talked a little bit about this and how it really messed with your personal life.
The best example I can give is being at the bottom of the J curve is when I made that transition, my revenue went down.
Exactly.
The bottom of the J was my revenue hitting rock bottom. But I had faith that in the end, even though we were kind of suffering financially through this, that once we made the transition, that we would come out on the upward curve. And we did.
Exactly. And I think that the brutal fact, though, was that this personal injury life is not suiting, it's not creating the lifestyle that I want. You know, I'm sure I like the work that I do. It's fulfilling for my clients. I like going to trial, but with the trial calendar, it's not giving me, what did we talk about? You know, the firm was becoming your prison, right?
Right. Well, and that's frequently is the life of a litigator who can't figure out how to get out of that trap, is that the litigation, the courts, your constant being on call to go to trial becomes your prison.
And then so that's when you had to accept that so that you could actually expand. And it's a mindset. We talk about a lot about this with Atticus. Once you accept that brutal fact, then you can kind of move on to solutioning. Okay, I need someone to help me, a litigation. So we talked about that with Atticus. I need to get another partner that can help me with my litigation calendar if you're not getting out of personal injury. Or I need to find a new practice area, a new niche like we talked about. We're going to talk about a hedgehog concept in a little bit. But I think that until you can really, truly accept the brutal facts, and where I am right now, it is accepting that we're in a growth mode and it's requiring a lot more of my time than I'm probably comfortable with. And I tell people this, I tell you this all the time. If I'm still working these hours this time next year, then we're going to have a different conversation. But for now, once I accepted that these are the hours that this job is going to require at this time, then it's almost like you stop fighting it. But you also have to know, like, these are my limits. I can't make this my way of life.
Well, the other brutal fact that we have to face, that you said we're in this 5-year growth plan that we just started. There's the saying, growth sucks cash.
Yes.
And it really sucks cash. I mean, we are hiring like nobody's business.
We have no more spots.
We've run out of space. I don't know where we're going to put everybody, but that costs money. And anytime in a contingency fee firm where we're waiting 2 years or longer to get paid on a case, you know, that means your profit margins are shrinking. So we're back to the bottom of the J curve once again in terms of actual profit margin, but it's not an accident. It's not something being done to us. It's something we thought about. It's something we planned for, but it is kind of a brutal fact that.
And we get the different, so, and I think that, so the other part of it, so we talked a lot about the brutal fact of it, but, you know, I think about that you got to retain faith. You've got to retain faith that it is just the bottom of that J, right? You're drawing your J and you're at the bottom of it. You're going to see growth. It is really cool to see the individual growth in some of our team members as they take on new challenges and their positions, utilize new technology. We've brought in AI tools, and it's very neat. Those are almost little glimmers of hope that you can see in the bottom of the J.
Right. Every time I get a little discouraged, I go back to reading stories about Bill Gates working out of his garage and see, look where he's at now. So
to be Bill Gates.
To be Bill Gates.
Maybe we just need to set the side a little lower.
Maybe we got in the wrong industry.
Yeah, but since we were talking about the hedgehog, you liked the hedgehog concept a lot.
So
didn't make my top 3.
So a hedgehog, as Jim Collins will explain in his book, is a small, very simple animal that does one thing and does one thing well, which is apparently burrow into the ground. I don't know. I've never met a hedgehog personally, but I think the point he was trying to make is the great companies consistently stick to what they do best and avoid getting distracted into new fields of business that are far away from their core competencies. I will say in the same breath, I'm very good at that, and then yet I am violating that rule significantly. So
how are you good at it? Let's start there.
Our core business is disability benefit work. Now, there's 3 types of disability benefits out there, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but at its core, they all work exactly the same way. There's an administrative process followed by federal court review. Each of them work the same way. Now, they have different languages. San Francisco 49ers used to run the West Coast offense. Houston Oilers used to run the Power I. They had different languages and how they called their play, but ultimately they're still playing the same game.
Yeah, you lost me there, but I think I get it.
I'm sitting here looking at McKinley, our producer, sitting over here like, what the hell kind of analogy was that? But
hey, no, I like it. I think, but you're right? It still took you're still trying to get to the 6 or 7 points you can get when you.
It's 6 plus.
We should probably stick with law. So yes, I think you're completely right. You've made a couple of strategic decisions. You started with Social Security, eventually moved to what I'll just, for layman's terms, call long-term disability, and then eventually branch out to veteran disability. Even so, 3 different types of disability, but same hedgehog.
That same hedgehog. They all work the same way, same client base. Same process, same procedure. It all works the same. And we've done that now for 20 years, and we've put our nose to the grindstone, and we've built a massive disability practice.
Yep. A nationwide, well-known, reputable business. So great points, Marc, but let's all talk about how you're not so good at something. Let's have another therapy session. How you violated the hedgehog concept.
So here's how I think I've violated the hedgehog concept, because we, a few years ago, started a separate mass tort section within the firm. And quite frankly, mass torts don't work like a disability claim whatsoever and don't really fit into our business model so much. I can make an argument how it's
I was going to say
ancillary to it and how it is complementary to our core competency. But at the end of the day, it is a pretty big gamble to step out of our comfort zone and kind of move into something that wasn't in our strike zone. Now, the enticement behind it is there's a big upside. Mm-hmm. One of the complaints that we've always had with disability law is our fees are capped.
Right.
There are no home runs in what we do like there is in the personal injury world I grew up in. So
is that why? Is that the reason why you decided to take the risk?
One of it, yes. So it taking the risk of starting the mass tort section, it gives us upside that we would not normally have had. Now, one of the things that Collins does talk about, he goes fire bullets first, then cannonballs. And I think what he's trying to illustrate is test things, take small little tests, test a lot of things. You're going to fail at a lot of stuff. But don't bet the farm on it. Just test things out and see what works. And then once you figure out what works, then fire the cannonball at it. And that's really what I did with mass torts, because I tested out a lot of things at the very beginning. Some of those things worked, some of them didn't. But as I moved forward through the process, I began to learn what were the good bets to make in mass tort and what you might want to stay away from. And then over time, I think I've managed to kind of figure out where to fire my cannonballs in the mass tort world. Still to be determined, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I can see where our mass tort practice is actually going to start rolling and start paying off in the long run.
And be complementary, like you said, to what we already do.
It is complementary. It's definitely not directly in line with what we do, but it does work. It works.
Yeah, so what you're saying is you kind of like the hedgehog concept until you get a gut feel for something and decide to do it.
Sometimes you just have to take your shot. So that was another one of the criticisms of Good to Great, was it sort of represents itself as sort of the way to do it, to the exclusion of other ways of doing things. That's what we learned in contracts. There's exceptions to every rule. In contracts, the first 3 chapters were offer, acceptance, and consideration. Mm-hmm. And the next 30 chapters were the exceptions there too.
Yeah.
I think that this kind of has the same feel to it. There are certainly exceptions that don't fit within the Good to Great concept.
Right. What was your last favorite thing about Good to Great that you want to talk about today?
The culture of discipline.
That was one of mine too.
I know. What's the one we agreed on? Go for it. What do you think about this concept there?
Well, again, talking specifically about where we are today, I think it's hard to execute on a growth plan without. So let me start by the Collins theory: disciplined people first. Because once you have disciplined people, then you have disciplined thought, then you have disciplined action. It's almost like a stair step. First one, then the next. You can't go all the way to disciplined action without having disciplined people first. And so I like that. The high C in me loves that order that he put there. But again, going back to where we are with our growth plan, I don't think you can execute on a growth plan where we are without disciplined people. I think you're going to have the fits and starts. Whether you see that in turnover, whether you see that in your cash flow, ebbing and flowing, you're going to have a great month and you're going to look back, 60, 90 days, whatever your cash flow cycle is. And you're like, oh, my people were on top of their game. They showed up. They were really focused. And then you're going to have a down month and you're like, what happened? And you're going to look back on your cash flow 60, 90 days before. And you're like, oh, my people were not in. They were all either on summer vacation or they were sick or whatever the issue was. But when you have a services business without disciplined people, you're never going to be able to execute and get to that next level.
This is Marc Whitehead, lawyer, entrepreneur, and business coach. Thanks for listening to the Successful Barrister Podcast. If we've stirred your juices, hit me up with an email at marc@marcwhitehead.com. Remember, Marc is spelled with a C. and get on the Successful Barrister newsletter mailing list. Even better, let's set up a call. I'd love to talk to you about working together, talk shop, or just shooting the breeze. All right, so I teased before our last break that the final thing that we're going to talk about here is disciplined action. However, sometimes I feel a little bit skeptical, sometimes back to the imposter syndrome that we talked about last week. Do we really have disciplined action here at Marc Whitehead and Associates? Or are we just winging it and hoping?
Yeah, on a hope and a prayer. You know, I think I can be really hard on our team. I think that we talked about this a lot. You know, my position is you get to be the nice guy, the fun guy, and I get to be the problem person. And so I think it can be really hard for me, or I get to be in the weeds on some things. But I think we have obviously a very great team. You wouldn't be where you are right now without the people that you are able to hire. And so let's talk a little bit about that hiring process, because I mostly inherited it. And I mean, why don't you start by what were you 4 years ago when you hired me?
So I will say that the best advice I ever got was that the quality of your life as a lawyer depends upon the quality of the people that you let in your front door. And that means both the people that you hire.
I really like that.
And the clients that you choose to accept. Mark Powers told me this many years ago at a seminar. This is my first exposure to Mark Powers and Atticus. And then the corollary, the thing he said after that was, you should go back to your office and fire your worst client and fire your worst employee. And I did. Whoa. And it was so liberating. It was like that's why I've become an Atticus disciple ever since. But the general principle is that I am very picky about the people that I let into my world. And I'm very specific, like they're not my family, but they are part of my community.
No, that's a good way to put that.
And I think that's how you have to think about the people that you hire. You know, I only have one employee that is my family, and that's my daughter, who's one of our paralegals. I love everybody here, but I don't consider them family. That's a little too close, a little bit too familiar, but they're part of my community. And I want them to succeed. I want them to do well. I want to put them in a position to where they're happy and where they do well. Health and happiness is one of our core values. But not everybody fits into that. So I have to be very picky about who I let in the front door. I'll use you as an example. How many times did I interview you before I actually hired you?
Aren't you still interviewing me?
I think I am.
Yeah, that's probably so. Yeah, 4 years. No, seriously, I think I was on 5. It was 4 or 5.
4 or 5. How many hours did that?
Hours
and hours.
My group interview was like 5 or 6 people, 3 hours, I think.
Yeah. And of course, we put you through all the psychological testing, the DISC profile, the J test.
I think I failed them.
Yeah, something like that.
No, but we do. So we still do those 2 tests. So our process, we are very disciplined about that. So I'll do a screening, a quick screen phone call, which isn't, you didn't do that before me, but we did a quick screening phone call, make sure we're aligned on money and the expectations, the brief expectations of the job. Then I'll do a Zoom. And we'll do 2 tests. One you just called the J test, which we really don't know. I mean, poor Jay, we don't really know what it's called. The real talent and hiring test or something. And
I think it's called the hiring MRI. I think that's what he calls it.
Which is a risk analysis, but really we lean a lot on the DISC test as well. DISC, D for dominance, I for influence, S for steadiness, and C for compliance, which is a whole other episode. And then, assuming that all goes well, we ask them to read your book, which a lot of people, I mean, surprisingly, don't do before they even come in for an in-person interview. It's a rigorous interview process designed to bring in only the best people who really not only want the job, but who show real genuine interest in the work that we do.
And the reference checks that we do. I vigorously talked to all of your references and managed to pry out a bunch of stuff about you that you did not want to tell me. I remember this very specifically.
Yeah. Coach your references, people.
Yes, exactly. If you're looking for a job, make sure your references know what to say.
No, obviously, we're joking. Obviously, they didn't say anything too badly.
No, they didn't. They didn't.
So moving past our hiring, I'd say EOS has really helped us.
The entrepreneurial operating system.
Correct. Yep, we've talked a little bit about it, particularly as it relates to the level 10.
Which is the meeting that you have within the entrepreneurial operating system on a weekly basis.
I appreciate you, Mark. You're helping me out.
You have to remember, people may not have listened to the last episode.
That's fair. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your patience with me, listeners. But the level 10 meeting, which we pretty much always do every Monday, 3:00 for 90 minutes, it has that set agenda which reinforces discipline with us. And it's a good way, I think, to get us to that next level, because what we were doing, we already had a set meeting schedule. So meetings before I even came on were pretty structured here. You had your monthly dashboards with each of your teams, the people who attended and the days, the times. We had your all staff where you got to see everybody and everybody got to connect in that familial way you were talking about, but then also, or community way that we were talking about. But then also we had our huddles. Every team had their huddles. And so I think the meeting structure was already there and we had the foundation, but level 10 meetings and the EOS help, that's definitely gotten us to that next level.
So I would say the other discipline that we have is we're pretty disciplined in using our technology to our advantage.
Yes.
We use the Litify system, which basically maps out all of our processes and sets tasks and deadlines. And we're pretty rigorous about being disciplined about following that structure. You have to be with so many people working remotely these days.
If it doesn't exist in Litify, it didn't happen.
It never
Whether
happened.
that was a phone call to a client or a document that brought in. For a law firm, first of all, for a law firm, but then a law firm with two governmental, two departments that deal with the government, we're actually very paperless, which is surprising.
Yes, I wish the government was as paperless as we are.
It takes discipline. You're right. It takes discipline on our people to handle that paper efficiently, get it processed and in the right place, and then make sure that actioned.
One area of technology that I wish we would become a little bit more disciplined in is we have a client portal now that we've developed, or actually not, we didn't develop, Case Status developed it, but then we've modified it for our own purposes, that we're trying to integrate into our firm culture and to our systems, which is a whole different way to communicate with your clients than what we've been used to, what I've been used to for 30-something years. And that takes a little bit of discipline to get your people on board and say, this is the primary way that we need to communicate with our client, and this is why. You have to always give your employees the why. I think some sections are doing okay with that within the firm. Other sections, we're still works in progress, but that's kind of one of those areas that I think we're moving in the right direction in terms of firm discipline, but I can see where we could get a lot better.
And I think that that's a great way to end, Mark. We'll end where we started, which we had so many great foundations and it got us to where you are today. And then when you embark on this next growth plan, it's hard to, you kind of see the trees without seeing the forest. And you see how hard it is to kind of get people to, when you're moving cheese, to adopt this new technology. And that's where I can kind of get a little burnt out on just trying to move and really kind of get change going in the firm. But we've really got a great foundation. It's just the next level. We were always already texting our clients and using automations and all those types of things. And now we've upped our game with AI. We're investing in AI technology as well as with this client portal. It's an app specifically for our clients. And so we're challenging not only our clients, but also our team members to get better at the way that they're doing things. And it's kind of hard to see that we're doing all right.
We're doing all right. So here's the $64,000 question. On Jim Collins' scale of good to great, are we good? Or are we great?
Yes.
I like it. With that affirmative answer, we want to thank all of you for listening to the Successful Barrister podcast, where legal legends are made. I love that. That's our new tagline, where legal legends are made. I'm Marc Whitehead.
And I'm Diana Berry.
And together we are the dynamic duo of law. Please remember to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you found any of this to be of value, please pass this podcast on to a friend. Also, we ask that you visit our website at thesuccessfulbarrister.com to sign up for our award-winning, not really, newsletter. We actually have a printed newsletter that goes out, and I know it's good because when we forget to send it out, people call me, "Where's my newsletter?" And finally, don't forget about our sponsor, Marc Whitehead Associates, a great law firm, a national disability law firm that is owned by this tremendously handsome young devil of a man. And visit the firm at disabilitydenials.com. And with that, we're out. See you next time.
Bye.